medicine. We also offer a lot of health screenings and health checkups from diagnostics and labs. Today I have here with me Dr. Monica. She's our clinical psychologist, and she's going to be talking about stress management and burnout prevention. Dr. Monica?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And I hope it can be helpful and useful, the following talk about stress management and burnout prevention. So I'm the clinical psychologist in Valiant Clinic. I'm specialized in clinical psychology and individual psychotherapy. I'm Portuguese, always worked in Lisbon University as clinical psychology department director and as a professor there. And it's really a pleasure for me to be here. It's going to be interactive talk, and I will propose some exercises. So mainly, I'm not going to rely so much on the PowerPoints, and I will suggest some exercises that can be helpful for the objectives in mind. And mainly today, I will propose that we learn about what is stress, so the definition, what's the difference between stress and burnout, what is healthy and unhealthy stress. We also will talk about the neuropsychology of stress and to understand better why we react the way we react facing certain challenges. How can we assess our stress levels and how can we manage stress efficiently? So indeed, there are many ways of managing stress. This is just a small joke. Having a scream room can be one of them, but we are going to talk about other kinds of strategies to manage stress. So what is stress? We all talk about it, but psychologically, stress is a reaction. And it's a psychological reaction, a physiological reaction, and a behavioral reaction to a threat, to a demand or threatening situation. So basically, it's how our body responds to any situation that is perceived as a threat or as a challenge. The stress response is basically very similar in every individual. So we have a biological way to respond to threats, and that's actually what makes us survive. So the stress response is a powerful tool that our body uses to increase the odds of overcoming obstacles. It will keep us alert and productive. However, if we constantly face threatening situations, or if they are too intense, so either too intense or lasting for too long, it can result in serious physical, emotional, and behavioral problems, having a very significant impact on our health. Indeed, and especially here in Dubai, 80% of our, not our body, but probably our life is damaged by stress. We face a lot of stressors, And if we don't manage it well, actually our health, mental and physical, starts suffering from it. And it's quite serious, the damage. That's why here we see many strokes, many cardiac problems, not only mental health. I mean, depression rates here and anxiety disorders are extremely high. What's the difference between stress and burnout? So stress, we have to consider it as it's our way of it's the way that our body responds to a challenge. So it's mediated by our sympathetic system, and it's inevitable. I mean, it's not possible that we will not, if we face, for instance, a tiger in front of us, our body has a certain way of responding. So it starts increasing the heart rate, the blood sugar levels have to increase. The body prepares to fight or to flight, or the third stress reaction, to paralyze. So we have three main ways of dealing in facing a threat or a challenge. Either we fight, either we paralyze, or we flight. So we run away from, we avoid. And that's how we are biological prepared to face it. So it's inevitable. We will react to stress. I mean, let's say that stress that is the response to a threat, it's inevitable. It's biological determined. Burnout is not inevitable. So burnout is an accumulation of stress responses and results in unmanageable levels of stress. Burnout can be prevented. Stress can be managed. So that's one of the main differences. It's very important to be aware of how stress affects us. How do we tend to react to threats and demanding situations? And how, what are the factors that are contributing to that? So I will invite you to watch this video that gives us a perspective of what is stress and what are the consequences. Okay, so let's look.
Are you sleeping restlessly, feeling irritable or moody, forgetting little things, and feeling overwhelmed and isolated? Don't worry, we've all been there. You're probably just stressed out. Stress isn't always a bad thing. It can be handy for a burst of extra energy and focus, like when you're playing a competitive sport or have to speak in public. But when it's continuous, the kind most of us face day in and day out, it actually begins to change your brain. Chronic stress, like being overworked or having arguments at home, can affect brain size, its structure, and how it functions, right down to the level of your genes. Stress begins with something called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, a series of interactions between endocrine glands in the brain and on the kidney, which controls your body's reaction to stress. When your brain detects a stressful situation, your HPA axis is instantly activated and releases a hormone called cortisol, which primes your body for instant action. But high levels of cortisol over long periods of time wreak havoc on your brain. For example, chronic stress increases the activity level and number of neural connections in the amygdala, your brain's fear center. And as levels of cortisol rise, electric signals in your hippocampus, the part of the brain associated with learning, memories, and stress control, deteriorate. The hippocampus also inhibits the activity of the HPA axis, so when it weakens, so does your ability to control your stress. That's not all though. Cortisol can literally cause your brain to shrink in size. Too much of it results in the loss of synaptic connections between neurons and the shrinking of your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that regulates behaviors like concentration, decision-making, judgment, and social interaction. It also leads to fewer new brain cells being made in the hippocampus. This means chronic stress might make it harder for you to learn and remember things, and also set the stage for more serious mental problems like depression and eventually Alzheimer's disease. The effects of stress may filter right down to your brain's DNA. An experiment showed that the amount of nurturing a mother rat provides its newborn baby plays a part in determining how that baby responds to stress later in life. The pups of nurturing moms turned out less sensitive to stress because their brains developed more cortisol receptors, which stick to cortisol and dampen the stress response. The pups of negligent moms had the opposite outcome, and so became more sensitive to stress throughout life. These are considered epigenetic changes, meaning that they affect which genes are expressed without directly changing the genetic code. And these changes can be reversed if the moms are swapped. But there's a surprising result. The epigenetic changes caused by one single mother rat were passed down to many generations of rats after her. In other words, the results of these actions were inheritable. It's not all bad news though. There are many ways to reverse what cortisol does to your stressed brain. The most powerful weapons are exercise and meditation, which involves breathing deeply and being aware and focused on your surroundings. Both of these activities decrease your stress and increase the size of the hippocampus, thereby improving your memory. So don't feel defeated by the pressures of daily life. Get in control of your stress before it takes control of you.
I hope you found it interesting, the video. One of the key elements that was mentioned, and I would like to ask for your attention to it. It's actually the role of a very important hormone called cortisol. Indeed, cortisol is the hormone that is released whenever, besides adrenaline, when we face a demanding situation or threat. It can be an exam, it can be if we have, imagine an important meeting, or if we are going to meet someone new, if we are in traffic. Whenever we are in situations that are demanding and stressful, we start releasing cortisol. Cortisol, it's a very interesting hormone because in low doses, it's actually very protective. It's the same group in terms of molecular structure of cortisone. So cortisone is actually an anti-inflammatory. But cortisol, when is in high levels, has the opposite effect. It starts to have and to increase the inflammatory response in our body. So literally, we can die from stress. We can die from chronic high levels of cortisol. Cortisol, what does it do in our brain? It affects directly a part of our brain called amygdala. Amygdala, that is the center of fear, is actually what prepares us to fight. The problem with the amygdala when it gets hyperactivated by cortisol is that it's gonna block two areas of our brain and cause damage in two areas of our brain. That is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the area of our brain responsible for decision taking, for reflection, for mathematics, for impulse control, so for managing emotions. So now you see, if when high levels of cortisol impact the amygdala and the amygdala blocks the prefrontal cortex, it's very likely that we won't feel able to make rational decisions, that we won't feel able to control emotions or control impulses. It's more likely that we start, for instance, eating too much, or smoking too much, or abusing alcohol, or having suddenly anger explosions, because our prefrontal cortex is not working in its best because of that hyperactivation of the amygdala due to cortisol. Another area that is very damaged when by high levels of cortisol, and that is blocked by the amygdala, is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a very important area of the brain. It's responsible for memory and learning. So it means that if we are under chronic levels of stress, and therefore constantly releasing cortisol, we won't be able to, we start having blackouts. We don't memorize so well. It can even lead to Alzheimer, for instance. We can't learn. We feel that we barely can read. So that's normally symptoms of chronic stress. Therefore, I will propose an exercise that is about, in one hand, for you to think about your what kind of symptoms you might be experiencing, and you have one of the worksheets that is symptoms of stress, and there you can see the difference between acute symptoms. And acute symptoms of stress are symptoms that occur before or during a stressful situation, and they are physical. For instance, you can feel headaches, back pain, sweating, indigestion, fatigue. It can be emotional. You start worrying too much, you start feeling irritable, you have anger outbursts, you start losing motivation, you have difficulty concentrating, you start feeling mood instability, decrease in the sex drive, having memory problems like we mentioned, or also having behavioral symptoms, nail biting, constant thoughts about, those stressors, having disrupted sleep, disrupted diet, not exercising, start having interpersonal conflicts, start withdrawing, start procrastination, delaying things that are important to be concluded. So these are acute symptoms of stress. And I would like to suggest that maybe you can identify in your personal case what kind of symptoms, if it's the case, you are experiencing. And then we have the chronic symptoms of stress, the symptoms and consequence of long-term stress. And indeed, chronic stress, or being permanently exposed to stress factors, can lead to heart diseases, anxiety disorders, skin diseases, for instance, psoriasis, very common in situations of chronic stress, depression, very linked with chronic stress, memory impairment, even Alzheimer, sleep disorders, a weakened immune system. Like I said, the fact that we are constantly releasing cortisol, that increases the inflammatory response in our body, which means that we will be much more vulnerable to other diseases. And poor diet and exercise habits. So I would invite you to go through those symptoms and to see if you identify yourself with some of them. And then if you want to share or just keep it for yourself, it's absolutely fine. And now I also would like you to think about the factors that contribute in your specific case, that contribute to stress. So I'm going to suggest that you will describe your biggest stressors in the following categories and rate them in a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is, well, it's a little stressful, and 10, you'd say it's extremely stressful. So in the category of daily hassles, that are the common annoyance or strains of daily life, are you facing, for instance, stressors in the commuting, like in traffic? Are you facing work problems? Are you facing lack of sleep? Problems with doing, this is more for students, but a lot of homework, limited free time, arguments with a partner, with a spouse. So in this category, what kind of stressors are you facing? Then there is another category of factors that contribute to stress that are linked with major life changes. These are important events, and that can be positive or negative, but that require a significant adjustment. It's about adjustment to change. And here in Dubai, we face that a lot. I mean, either changing jobs, moving to another country. Majority of us, we moved from our own country. So here, what stressors in this category of major life changes are you facing? For instance, the new job, or loss of a job, or death of a loved one, or a major sickness, yours, or an illness, injury of you or your loved ones, separation or divorce, birth of a child that requires also a huge adjustment. So what kind of factors that contribute to stress in this category are you facing? And the last category of stressors has to do with life circumstances. And this means what permanent or long-term circumstances that make your life much more difficult. And this involves financial problems. Are you facing financial problems? Disability, chronic illness, conflictual relationships. I mean, the relationship with your spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend or partner, is it conflictual with your parents-in-law, with your colleagues? Are you having to be in a job whose values conflict with your own culture or with your own values? That is a major stress factor. Are you asked to do things that go against your ethics? Are you asked to do things that are against your values? Are you suffering from discrimination, job dissatisfaction? Are you living in somewhere unsafe? So these are also factors of stress that have to be taken into account. And if you want to do your own stress assessment, it's important that you are aware of which factors are contributing to your stress levels and all the symptoms that we mentioned. Okay? And if so, I would suggest that you would write and keep that for you, if you want to share. And then this is just a summary of the video. As stress as well as a natural reaction to a threat. What are the symptoms, like we mentioned, the impact of acute stress, and the impact of chronic stress, as we mentioned, the chronic symptoms, and now how to manage your stress more effectively. So I'm going, because our talk is around 40 minutes. I don't want to keep you longer, and I think it's important that we do the exercise. So there are indeed many stress relief techniques. In the video, you saw medication, slow breathing, and here it's just another joke. Visualization of chocolate bars can also be helpful in certain cases. But mainly, for instance, psychotherapy can be quite helpful. So above all, it's important that you understand what stress is, that is a natural and biological reaction. And it's important that you are aware of how do you react? What are your particular reactions to stress? Because although there is a common way of reacting, everyone has also a particular way. I mean, some people develop more physical symptoms, others develop more emotional. So understand the way you react. Then identify your stress sources. What we were doing is extremely important, is to think what is contributing for my stress response, what is triggering it. Is at work? Is at home? Is it with friends? Is it financial? Is it with the colleagues? Is it with myself? Is it my health? Then learn to recognize your stress signals and symptoms, like we were mentioning. Recognize the way you tend to cope with stress. And we will go through that. Then we will also learn how to implement healthy stress management strategies. But here is important that first you recognize, how do you normally cope with stress? Okay? And how can we, if it's an unhealthy way of coping, how can we learn healthy coping mechanisms? Then another very important strategy is to make self-care a priority. Take care of yourself the same way you would take care of a loved one. Make self-care a priority. And the basics, your sleep, your food, things that give you pleasure, things that can make you reset is extremely important. Then ask for support when you need. Asking for support is extremely important. Learn and practice to be assertive. That's another strategy, very important, because one reason, for instance, many of my patients that end up developing depression and anxiety is that they face a lot of conflicts at work. Sometimes they are asked to do tasks that are, the expectations are not realistic, and they can say no, they cannot say no, or at home. And sometimes there are ways where we really need to be assertive in order to protect ourselves, but in a way that it won't damage others. And that's being assertive, is to actually be assured and communicate our needs in the way that the other understands and doesn't feel hurt, or we don't feel hurt. Then another one is to learn how to manage your time. It's very important that you include in your day the same proportion of achievement activities. So activities that give you a feeling of achievement, that you know, okay, today I did something well, I learned something, I felt that I progressed on this, I got a good result in the task, I was able to accomplish something. Also, reset activities and pleasurable is just about something that gives you pleasure. And then activities that make you feel bonded. So closeness, attachments, social attachments are extremely important. And if you manage to have a balance between these three kinds of activities, it's very likely that your mental health will be in quite good shape. Last but not least is to learn to set boundaries, which is also a little bit linked with being assertive. So I will propose the exercise 2 so that we can practice a little bit of stress management techniques. And here, so you have the other handout where it says stress management exercise 2. And I will invite you again to describe in detail your major source of stress. And if you want to share it, it's welcome. What's your largest source of stress? And after that, briefly list 2 other stressors that you are experiencing. Okay, so stress awareness and the factors that are causing you suffering at the moment. Then I will suggest that you do the other exercise, that is to identify, as we did before, and it's important to really be aware of this, the symptoms that you are experiencing or that you have experienced in the past in response to stress. Do you tend to feel anger or frustration? Do you feel mainly fatigue? Do you socially withdraw? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel headaches? Do you start overeating? Or do you lose your appetite? Do you lose your libido? Do you start having a lot of indigestion problems? Do you start procrastinating? like delaying things that you need to do? You start worrying too much. You start abusing alcohol or drugs. You start to feel back pain, muscle tension. You start to experience, and normally this is one of the main symptoms as well, and that my patients always come with this, is sleep difficulties. So what are the symptoms that you experience? And now we will see regarding how can we start managing it. So we start with social support is extremely important. So even if your social support cannot solve the problem, just talking with someone can be crucial. So whenever you talk about the experience that you are living, the problems, whenever you talk what you are going through, actually that simple act release certain hormones that are very protective and decrease the cortisol. So let's think about 3 people in your life that you can turn to for support. It can be a friend, it can be a family member, it can be your partner, it can be your family doctor, it can be a colleague, it can be a psychotherapist. Who can you turn to for support? So list 3 people, write their name, and write how can they help? How can they help you? Can they help, for instance, if you are facing a lot of stressors with the kids, can they stay with the kids for a night, with your kids for a weekend, so that you can rest? Can they, for instance, do the shopping at least in a week that things are really difficult? Think, how can they go with you to medical appointments? How can they help you? And how can you use the social support to ease one of the current stressors that you are facing? The next stress management technique is the emotional management. So here, stress can trigger many negative emotions: self-doubt, anger, anxiety, even depressive feelings. If you ignore, this can exacerbate the stressor. So, emotional management is not about eliminating emotions. It's about dealing with them in a healthy way. In that sense, I will ask you and invite you to think about what habits or tendencies do you have to deal with negative emotions that actually worsen the situation. When you feel sad, when you feel anxious, when you feel angry, what's your habit? Do you start drinking more? Do you start being more provocative, provoking conflict? Do you start having outbursts? Do you start being aggressive? Do you start withdrawing? Do you start isolating, not talking? So what kind of habits or tendencies do you have when you experience negative emotions? And now I'm going to invite you to think about 2 ways in the past that actually you use to handle unpleasant emotions. For instance, instead of, if you were sad, if you were anxious, Was it helpful to go for a walk? Was it helpful to call a friend? Was it helpful to go for a movie? Was it helpful to book a psychotherapy session? Was it helpful to do some stretching exercises? Was it helpful to actually choose a good meal? So think about healthy ways that actually you also knew and practice when dealing with negative emotions. And now in terms of life balance, that is another very important factor to manage stress, because stress can be extremely destructive of if your life is heavily focused on one area. For example, a person who is only focused on a relationship will struggle if that relationship becomes, if there is a breakup, or if that relationship becomes very tense or not satisfactory. So in here, I'm gonna ask you to rate in the following areas from 1 to 5. What are the areas that you devote more attention to? Is it to your career? Is it to your family? Is it to fun and recreation? Is it to spirituality? Is it socializing? Is it to your intimate relationship? Is it to education? And based upon your ratings, what are the areas that you think that you are neglecting? And what are the areas that you think that you should start devoting more attention? So if you have a balance in all these areas, I can assure you that your resilience to stress and your way of managing stress will be improved and optimized. And last, let's talk about the basic needs. So stress management always involves assure that your basic needs are fulfilled and are met. During periods of high stress, many people take shortcuts when it comes to basic needs. For instance, they start neglecting sleep, they start neglecting exercise, they start neglecting personal hygiene. When these basic needs are neglected, the health and mental well-being starts deteriorating, and this will contribute to additional stress. So I will invite you to circle the basic needs that you tend to neglect in periods of high stress. Do you tend to neglect your sleep? Do you tend to neglect your personal hygiene? Do you tend to neglect your diet? Do you start eating or binge eating or binge drinking, for instance? Do you start to neglect your social and love needs? Do you start withdrawing from your partner or avoiding your partner or avoiding your friends? Do you start avoiding exercise or neglecting? Do you start having difficulties in managing addictions? Do you start smoking more, drinking more, for instance? Or do you start neglecting medical adherence? For instance, you stop taking certain medication that is important, you miss doctor appointments, you don't do the checkups, you don't care about your health. So what do you tend to neglect during periods of high stress? And now, as an alternative, what steps you can take to protect your basic needs? So, and this is extremely important, is during periods of high stress, how can you protect your basic needs? How can you assure that, yes, you are under a lot of stress, but how can you assure that you have enough sleep? How can you assure that you will still exercise, even 10 minutes per day, 15 minutes, but assure that there is something? How can you still protect your social and love needs? Not avoiding, for instance, going for dinner or having to meet with friends, not avoiding it. How do you assure that you will keep yourself away from, for instance, binge eating or binge drinking? Getting drunk is actually it's a coping mechanism to deal with stress for many people, but is extremely, is what actually makes it worse. Many patients, they get on Thursday, Friday, they get drunk because they just want to disconnect and to relieve from very high demanding jobs. But the problem is that then they don't even have a weekend and they feel exhausted on Sunday. And that will make everything worse. And it's a dangerous cycle. So make sure you can protect your basic needs. And we are in our time. So this is, you can see afterwards if you have access to the PowerPoint, but mainly go through the worksheets, and we have now some time for questions that I will be pleased to answer. Thank you for your attention.
Hi, Dr. Monica. Thank you very much for that very engaging webinar. This is Catherine in AES. If anybody does have any questions, if they'd like to put it in the text box and write the question, and we will read them out for Dr. Monica. But this session is recorded, and we will also be sharing it with your HR and management along with the worksheets. So thanks everybody for joining today. Actually, Dr. Monica, just while we're waiting on some questions, obviously we're all still very much in a pandemic at the moment, and like everybody, I think we're all in the same boat when it comes to missing our family, not being able to see family. I know for me personally, I haven't been home to Ireland for over a year and a half. Have you any tips on managing that kind of stress? Because obviously we're all concerned maybe about our families at home, not being vaccinated, or obviously just not seeing family and not having holidays. So if you just have any basic maybe suggestions or tips, just while we're waiting some questions. I do see one question coming in, but just if you get a chance to answer that. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you for that question. It's actually, at this moment, we are indeed facing very specific stress factors, and especially because what normally is a protective factor for mental health, that is the connection with the loved ones, the increase of the support system, it's now not there, and there is not, we can't have control on that, which makes us much more vulnerable. And indeed, loneliness, I didn't talk about that, but loneliness is one, at the moment, one of the most significant risk factors for decrease in mental health, for depression, for anxiety disorders. And indeed, what I would suggest is, well, to engage as much as you can in keeping in touch, even once a day through Zoom, with, for instance, you have one day to keep in touch with your close family through Zoom, another day for friends, another day for new community groups, like if you start engaging in other groups that have your interests, for instance, book lovers, imagine, or yoga groups, that's important. The crucial factor is guarantee that you have, although you cannot meet in person, that you still have the feeling of connection, and invite others to connect with you. I mean, we still, if we can't leave home, we can still prepare a meal all together. You can invite, I don't know if you have siblings or not, but your friends or parents, okay, let's cook a meal together, or share a receipt, or everything that can give you the feeling of closeness. Because indeed, at the moment, we cannot control that being with them, being with our loved ones, which cause a major suffering. So we have to find alternatives to keep closeness as we can, but not avoiding and not isolating ourselves. Extremely important, not isolate. And if you can even, go for a walk on the beach just to see people in a safe distance, but don't isolate yourself from the others. The sense of community, even if it's not through deep relationships, is extremely helpful to maintain our mental health.
Thank you so much, Dr. Monica. That was very helpful. There's a question that's come in from one of our members. What do you recommend for overcoming procrastination and decision paralysis, if I pronounced that correctly?
Yes.
Thank you.
I understand. It's also a very good question. Well, normally indecision paralysis and procrastination are linked with stress, but are also linked with the personality trait that is perfectionism. And in that regard, it's important to distinguish between what is my need of being perfect, and if I do I really need to be perfect, or do I strive for excellence? I mean, wanting to do something good in a good way and in an excellent way, it's a good virtue. But wanting to be perfect, it's actually can be extremely paralyzing. Because then we just don't act. We are so afraid of making mistakes or facing our failures that we paralyze. We don't take decisions. The point is, the less we do, the less we do. And the more we avoid, the more we feel bad about ourselves. So the gap between it's very likely that then we just can't do anything. And that really puts us in a very dangerous place. So I would suggest what? I would suggest that you prepare yourself for failure and embrace that. Small failures, for instance, yes, I'm not gonna, probably I cannot have a 95 out of 100 in a certain exam, but I will do it. And at least I did something. I can't, for instance, my bedroom is a mess. So if I can't clean it all the bedroom, better I don't do anything. No, at least do your bed every day. Start by that. Start by minimal things that are achievable, but accept small failures. It's the best way to actually to strive for excellence is if you prepare yourself and embrace the possibility of failure that is not catastrophic. If you do it, if you go, the chances of losing your job, well, maybe are not that high as they are if you just don't go or if you just don't do. So it's about managing expectations about yourself. Small steps, start with what is achievable. It's about that.
Great. Thank you so much, Doctor. I'm just conscious of time, but we have a couple of questions about meditation that you might recommend, and particularly for people that might be starting out on meditation. You might know a lot about meditation, but just in terms of source material, where does someone start? Thank you.
Yeah, these questions, but about meditation. So what kind of meditation would you recommend?
Recommendation, source
and how do you
material.
find motivation and demotivation?
Okay. Well, just we are really on time. Let me see. Like motivation start. And to forget traumatic. Well, regarding the demotivation that many times starts as a major depressive symptom. Well, I would suggest to start with very small things that can give you a minimum feeling of pleasure or achievement. It doesn't have to be, don't compare yourself with your ideal self. You know? Do something. Okay, if today you were already able to do 10 minutes of exercise, that's good. Don't beat yourself or feel demotivated just because you are not doing an Ironman. So start small. That's very important for motivation, because one of the errors that sometimes we make is we think that we have to wait to feel motivated to do. And it's actually the opposite. We have to do to start being motivated. Regarding particular forms of meditation, and well, I can share some material. You will have my email. If you want also to come to Valiant or have a session, we can work on some relaxation techniques that and other psychological techniques from stress management. I would recommend very effective the deep breathing exercises in a technique called 4-4-6. Progressive muscle relaxation, very effective. And well, you can contact me, or we can just have one session and discuss alternatives. Regarding the last question, how if there is a way to forget traumatic experiences? Well, a way to forget? No. There is a way to integrate. and to live with that. And that can be learned. It's not easy at all, but for that, psychotherapy is crucial. So if you can have the support of a clinical psychologist that is experiencing trauma or post-traumatic stress disorders, or that works with trauma, and here, unfortunately, I've been seeing it's one of the things that I work mainly, it's with trauma. I would totally recommend starting the psychotherapy. Thank you.
Dr. Monica, thank you again so much for joining us today. I know we're a little over time, but we really appreciate you being with us today. And we have got the session recorded, and I will be sharing it with all our clients. So thanks so much. And thank you, Raquel, for helping to arrange this today.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everybody. And if I can share Dr. Monica's email ID with you, Catherine, and if anybody wants to talk to her or book an appointment with her, they can just do it.
No problem. That's fine.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. Stay well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.